The Impact World Championship. Now, we talk about a lot here on the channel who can be an Impact World Champion. It's a phrase I use quite a lot. If they come to Impact Wrestling, they can be a world champion. If they get the right push, they can be a world champion. If they apply themselves, if they turn heel, if they turn babyface, if they do this gimmick, if they ditch this gimmick, they can be a world champion. Well, obviously, we're going to get to the end of the year very, very soon, and it gets to a point of reflection, doesn't it? Where you have to think about what can people potentially do in 2021, what should have they have done in 2020, what does the future look like? If we read the past, can we read the future? And in this video, what we're going to talk about is who can potentially become the Impact World Champion for the first time in their career next year. That's why we're going to talk about 5 future Impact World Champions for maybe 2021 or maybe a couple of years after that. So let's get straight into the names as to who could potentially be the Impact World Champion coming in the next 12 months. And let's start off with someone that isn't actually a part of the Impact Wrestling roster. That's Kenny Omega, because I think at this point, Kenny Omega becoming an Impact World Champion is not a certainty. Nothing's a certainty in pro wrestling, but I think it's a very, very good chance. Now, obviously, coming to Hard to Kill in January, we're going to have Kenny Omega teaming up with the Impact World Tag Team Champions, the Good Brothers, to face the current Impact World Champion Rich Swann and the Motor City Machine Guns. This is going to be Kenny Omega's first appearance inside of an Impact Wrestling ring, the first time that Kenny Omega has competed for Impact Wrestling, his first match. But I think it's going to be not just his first match, but I think it's going to be a first match of many in Impact Wrestling, because according to Dave Meltzer, it's been previously reported in the Wrestling Observer newsletter that Kenny Omega will be headlining multiple Impact Wrestling pay-per-views in this crossover and relationship that AEW have with Impact Wrestling going forward. Now, again, at the moment, we've spoke about the AEW and Impact Wrestling relationship a lot here on the channel, haven't we? What does it mean? What does it consist of? Talent trades, pay-per-views, TV specials. At this point, the details are still pretty sparse. We still don't know really what the nature of the true relationship is. We don't know how long this relationship is going to last. What we do know, what we can deal with, and the facts that have been reported, is that Kenny Omega is going to be at least appearing in multiple Impact Wrestling pay-per-views and wrestling multiple Impact Wrestling matches. Now, of course, as I mentioned, his first one's at Hard to Kill, but I've mentioned this before. The biggest match that I think Impact Wrestling and AEW can do as part of this crossover is World Champion versus World Champion. The AEW World Champion Kenny Omega versus the Impact World Champion Rich Swann. Now, I thought this was the match we were going to see at Hard to Kill. Obviously, we're not. We're going to see the 6-man tag instead. But I think this is going to be the beginning of what becomes the eventual match with Kenny Omega versus Rich Swann for both titles on the line. And ultimately, unfortunately for Rich Swann, I think that means we're going to see Kenny Omega become the Impact World Champion. Why? Because it makes the most sense. Kenny Omega is one of the best wrestlers in the world. He's one of the biggest stars in the world. He's the AEW World Champion. If Kenny Omega wins the Impact World Championship, which I think he would, first of all, obviously you do have to talk about where it's going to happen. We've spoke about this before. Does it happen an Impact Plus event? I don't know. There have been rumors that we could have a pay-per-view for Impact Wrestling in April. So April, I could see them stretching out until then and possibly having Kenny Omega versus Rich Swann in April for an Impact pay-per-view. I don't think they would do it for an Impact Plus event. I could see them possibly doing it at AEW Revolution in February. There's a lot of logistics to work out there, but I think if Rich Swann and Kenny Omega do eventually have a match, Kenny Omega wins and becomes the Impact World Champion in addition to being the AEW World Champion. Why? Because it makes sense. As I mentioned, Kenny Omega is one of the biggest wrestlers in the world, one of the biggest stars in pro wrestling at the moment. Obviously, you can compare him to people in WWE. Is he as big as those? I don't know. That's a discussion for a later day. But if Kenny Omega carries around with him the AEW World Championship and the Impact World Championship everywhere he goes, think of the advertisement that is for Impact Wrestling. We have seen that when Impact Wrestling is plugged on AEW Dynamite, when they say on AEW Dynamite, watch Impact Wrestling Tuesday nights on Access TV, the ratings go up and they do the record numbers that they have done on Access TV and on Twitch. So if Kenny Omega was carrying around the Impact World Championship in addition to the AEW World Championship, Kenny Omega then pretty much becomes a walking billboard for Impact on Access TV. Therefore, it just becomes, to me, a no-brainer that Kenny Omega would win the World Championship. Think of the lineage that it could help with the Impact World Championship too. And if Kenny Omega becomes the Impact World Champion, that locks him in for another match because eventually he's got to lose it, right? So if Kenny Omega wins the Impact World Championship, let's say for argument's sake that's in April, an Impact Wrestling pay-per-view in April, then he would probably have to drop the championship, I would suspect then in July at Slammiversary. It makes the most sense to me. Kenny Omega also, in the storyline so far, has called himself a collector of titles. Obviously, he's the AEW World Champion. He's also the AAA Mega Champion at the moment for the AAA promotion in Mexico. And then he wants to add to that championship collection with this Impact World Championship. And I think the first time they face off against each other, Rich Swann and Kenny Omega at Hard to Kill, I don't think it's going to be the last time. I think they're going to have another match, and I think in that match, Kenny Omega will become the Impact World Champion. It's a bold prediction. Might not come to pass. It's only a prediction. I'm not like these other pro wrestling journalists on social media that say their opinion and then report it as backstage news or spoilers. I don't know. This is just a prediction. This is what this is all about here on the channel. It's about sharing opinions, building a community, talking about pro wrestling in general. And one of my predictions for 2021 is that Kenny Omega is going to become the Impact World Champion by defeating Rich Swann. So certainly something to be excited about, because I think there's absolutely a potential for that to happen. Now, Chris Bey, I've said this numerous times here on the channel. I'm a big fan of Chris Bey, and we always have this discussion here on the channel. It's something that's brought up quite a lot as who can really be the top guy when it comes to Impact Wrestling. Who can be that top guy, that top wrestler that really carries the company, that when you think of Impact Wrestling and you think of their world champion, you go, yep, that guy, he's the one to carry the company on their back. He's the one that is really the true standout star in Impact Wrestling. And at the moment, they don't have that. And I think that's been one of Impact's biggest disadvantages this year, is that they don't have that top franchise player currently in Impact Wrestling. But they do have a multiple array of stars that could potentially become that person, become that world champion, and become that top tier player in Impact Wrestling. And I think the biggest person in the most prime position to do that is Chris Bey. I think this year Chris Bey's development has been outstanding. You see his work rate on social media. I think he's improving his look. He's improving his promo abilities. I think that was previously a criticism, but I think they're improving massively. His in-ring work is stellar. Obviously, this year Chris Bey became the X Division champion. It looks like he's transitioning back into the X Division, which I don't mind if he's not going to be in the main event scene for a while. Of course, he had his first Impact World Championship opportunity earlier this month against Rich Swann at Final Resolution, which he was unsuccessful in, but it showed that he can be a part of a main event program for a World Championship. I've mentioned before, I think Chris Bey's money in Impact Wrestling is as a babyface. I think as a babyface, as a top tier babyface, I think he becomes really something special. The most important thing though, when it comes to Chris Bey and when it comes to him being that top tier babyface, is that nothing changes. Nothing changes about him. I think this is a huge mistake with a lot of people and a lot of promotions when they convert a heel that's getting over. A heel gets it. This has happened a million times in pro wrestling, but it's so important because promoters forget it or fans forget it. Traditionally, and how it's always worked, you get over as a heel so much that you become a babyface. That's how it works. Look at the biggest stars of all time: Steve Austin, The Rock, John Cena, Roman Reigns, whoever. They start off as heels, whether it's part of a tag team or whatever. They start off as heels and then they get so over with their heel gimmick that they become a babyface. But most importantly, they don't change. And I think that's important with Chris Bey. Steve Austin was a heel, but then when he turned babyface, what changed? The only thing that changed is his opponents. He stopped fighting babyfaces and started fighting heels. Nothing about his personality or his traits changed. The Rock was exactly the same. The Rock talked trash and he continued talking trash. He turned babyface. What changed? Nothing. He still talked trash. He just talked trash about heels instead of babyfaces. That should be the same for Chris Bey. I really like his finesse character. I really like the confidence, the arrogance that he oozes. He oozes charisma. And you can't not watch this guy and say that he can't be potentially something very, very big in the future. So I think eventually his big money is as a babyface, but I don't think they should change anything about his character. The only thing they should change is his opponents. So I think give it a year. I could see Chris Bey being an Impact World Champion. And it's fantastic, isn't it? Because you look at this guy, and he's obviously been a fan of, pro wrestling for his whole life, but there are the videos of him with the old TNA World Heavyweight Championship when he was a kid. He bought a replica. Having that moment, I think, eventually of him holding the current Impact World Championship and putting it side by side of him as a young kid holding the former TNA World Heavyweight Championship, that is such a magic moment waiting to happen. That is such a fantastic story. That's what pro wrestling's all about. It's about telling stories. It's about telling compelling stories and about telling stories you can relate to. And at the end of the day, Chris Bey's just like us. He's a pro wrestling fan. And if you can demonstrate that, and if you can tell that properly in the story, and if you can still keep his persona and not change anything really about his gimmick, but just maybe tweak a little bit and show the pro wrestling fan that he is and was as a child, and then the moment the money shot really is him holding up the Impact World Championship and putting it side by side with the old picture of him holding the old TNA World Heavyweight Championship. So I really am a big fan of Chris Bay. I think he can do really big things in Impact Wrestling. The sky really is the limit when it comes to him. So I think he can be an Impact World Champion. 12 months time, I think anything can happen. Another name is Ace Austin. This is a guy that we did a video recently talking about Ace Austin and that he just hasn't been on TV at all since Bound for Glory, really. Did an episode of Explosion, that was about it. And lots of people were rightfully so saying, where is this guy? He's one of Impact Wrestling's brightest stars. He's still under contract for about 2 more years, so he's not going anywhere anytime soon. So quite frankly, it's a farce that he's not on TV at all at the moment. But then this past week on Impact Wrestling on Access TV, we see him announced as X Division Wrestler of the Year. So obviously plans are there for him to return to Impact Wrestling soon. He was also announced as part of the bracket for the Super X Cup tournament. So obviously plans are there. But you have to remember that, as I mentioned, this is a guy that in Slammiversary, he was in the main event. He was competing for the Impact World Championship. The story going into that was that if he won, he would be the youngest world champion in Impact Wrestling history. Now, obviously, they can still do that. Time is running out. I still do think Impact Wrestling would want to do that because the person that previously holds the record is Tessa Blanchard. That didn't end well. And, when it comes to companies, they don't want to... I'm not saying Impact Wrestling wants to erase history, but when there's a record that you can beat as a promotion, you always want to beat it because you always want to do the latest thing. That is currently Ace Austin. Ace Austin, I think universally, everyone in the comments, you can let me know, but I think everyone would say that Ace Austin should and will be a world champion in Impact Wrestling. As I mentioned, he's got 2 years left on his deal. So if it gets to the end of those 2 years and he hasn't been world champion, then they've done something wrong. Because the tools are all there. The tools are all there, and hopefully, given that he's going to be involved in the Super X Cup for Genesis, given that he was the X Division Wrestler of the Year, given that this was a guy that was competing for the World Championship at Slammiversary, he was the last guy eliminated by Eddie Edwards, and the story going into it was that he was going to be the youngest world champion in the company's history. They got to move fast. If they want to break that record, there's still time. But I think regardless if they break that record or not, Ace Austin is going to be a world champion in Impact Wrestling. He just has to be. Because if they're not using his talent properly. Because this is a guy that truly has everything. I think he's only like 23 years old. Might even be younger than that. The sky really is the limit. It's the same with Chris Bay. And I mentioned it before with Chris Bay. I see Chris Bay as being the top babyface in Impact Wrestling for years to come. I see Ace Austin being the top heel in Impact Wrestling for years to come. Ace Austin versus Chris Bay in the main event for the World Championship is going to be a big money match. Whether it's going to be 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, eventually it's going to happen. These could potentially be the 2 stars that propel Impact Wrestling over the next couple of years. I think if Impact Wrestling was smart, they would look at people like Ace Austin, look at people like Chris Bay and say, right, they might not be ready for it right now. Let's give them the opportunity to succeed. I say that all the time here. You've got to give talent the opportunity to succeed. It's sink or swim. I just know for a fact people like Ace Austin and Chris Bay would absolutely swim in that scenario and they would thrive. So Ace Austin is another one that I think it's just a given that if you give him the opportunity, he would succeed and become a world champion. Now this one might be one that happens very, very soon. Of course, it's Moose. Moose, pretty much in 2020, if you want to look at anyone in 2020 in Impact Wrestling, it's difficult to say that Moose hasn't had the best year in 2020. Ever since he brought back the TNA World Heavyweight Championship, the guy has thrived. Now he's a true main eventer. He is a true credible main eventer. He can be a guy that can be a credible world champion, and it looks like eventually he's going to get that opportunity at the World Championship. They've been teasing this feud between Moose and Rich Swann for a long, long time at this point. Moose has been calling himself the real world champion for a while, ever since holding the TNA World Heavyweight Championship. He mentioned before in interviews that he has these plans to unify the TNA World Heavyweight Championship with the Impact World Championship, and I've mentioned before, I think that's the most credible and most linear ending to this storyline when it comes to the TNA World Heavyweight Championship. Eventually the storyline has to end, and eventually he has to drop the TNA World Heavyweight Championship, or it has to disappear. I think the best way for making it disappear is for Moose to win the Impact World Championship and say, I've fulfilled my destiny. I now unify both titles, and I'm the true real world champion in Impact Wrestling. I think that's the smartest thing, and I think that's the most logical thing to do when it comes to that storyline. Again, look at the guys that Moose has defeated this year. Obviously, EC3, now he's feuding with Willie Mack. They got the I Quit match at Genesis, which I expect Moose to win. As I mentioned, I think that's a storyline that is going to be intended to move into a feud with Rich Swann for the World Championship. The confusing thing now is, what is Rich Swann really doing? Because I think Kenny Omega's on the horizon. Does Moose take a back seat? I don't know. But you look at the development that Moose has had over the last 12 months. To me, he has stepped up, and now he's credible to hold the World Championship. I think he's got the look. I think he looks into the best shape of his life at this point, especially compare him to the look he had when he first came into Impact Wrestling in 2016, 2017. His physique is far, far better. His promos have improved significantly. His entrance is fantastic. He's much, much better in the ring at this point. He's a credible world champion challenger and a credible world champion by proxy. So I think Moose, out of the names on this list, is probably, maybe Kenny Omega will probably become Impact Wrestling world champion first, but Moose is a very close second to that. So I think Moose, it's a matter of time before he becomes world champion in Impact Wrestling. Of course, there's discussion about his contract. His contract does expire. I think it's in February of 2021. I highly expect him to re-sign. I don't see where else he would go. I think he's locked in and dialed in to stay with Impact Wrestling for the future because they've invested so much time and so much effort into getting him over and getting him to the next level. And I think Moose is eventually going to be a world champion. I think it's as simple as that when it comes to him. And finally, Josh Alexander. Now, this is an interesting one because I hear some people say, well, what about Ethan Page? Now, if Ethan Page was going to be staying with Impact Wrestling, Ethan Page would obviously be on this list. He might even be the first name on this list because I've mentioned it several times that I feel like Ethan Page can and would be a world champion if he stayed in Impact Wrestling. The issue is, of course, is that we know that's probably not going to be the case because Ethan Page isn't going to stay with Impact Wrestling. It's been reported by the likes of Fightful and other outlets that, of course, Ethan Page's contract is expiring at the end of the year. Come January 1st, 2021, Ethan Page is going to be a free agent and he's not expected to re-sign with Impact Wrestling. So, of course, Josh Alexander, he is going to be staying with Impact Wrestling because he signed a 3-year contract extension in 2019, so he's staying until 2022. So the North is splitting up. We've seen that slowly happening on Impact Wrestling TV over the last couple of weeks. It's going to come to a head eventually, but eventually Ethan Page is going to leave, and that's going to leave Josh Alexander in Impact Wrestling. Now, Josh Alexander, even if Ethan Page stayed, I think Josh Alexander could be a world champion in Impact Wrestling. I look at this as sort of the modern version of Beer Money in Impact Wrestling, in the sense that both guys are going to split up, and I think both guys could have become world champions in Impact Wrestling, and I think Josh Alexander is going to be the same in this situation. I think Josh Alexander, people sleep on Josh Alexander a little bit, I think, because Ethan Page is, arguably Ethan Page is the star of the North, and obviously his contract's expiring, and Ethan Page is the guy with the promos, he's loud, charismatic, but Josh Alexander arguably is the worker of the tag team. He's the guy that in the ring I think is the better worker out of him and Ethan Page. He reminds me a little bit of a Kurt Angle style, obviously because of the amateur wrestling background. Literally broke his neck is where he worked with a broken neck too. This is a guy that I think if they really find his niche, and I think he's already find that level of aggression. I think you look at his social media posts, he's another one, getting into the shape of his life at the moment. I think he realizes that this is a big opportunity for him. Coming out of the North, also as well, he's going to be put over in this feud with Ethan Page, because Ethan Page is going to be leaving, and as tradition in pro wrestling, when you're leaving, you put over the star that the company wants you to do. In this case, it'll be Josh Alexander. It'll be his former tag team partner and real life best friend. So I think Josh Alexander is going to be in a prime position after Ethan Page leaves Impact Wrestling, and I wouldn't rule it out, because all Josh Alexander needs is a push in the right direction, and that might just be Ethan Page's leaving. Ethan Page leaves, puts Josh Alexander over, he gets a lot of momentum, that snowballs, and eventually you've got yourself a world champion. Josh Alexander has the tools to make it work. We've seen Josh Alexander be Impact World Tag Team Champion for over a year with Ethan Page. The North are the longest reigning tag team champions in Impact Wrestling history. So this is a guy that can deliver in pressure situations. The North are a tag team of two singles guys that were put together, so they've both come up being single stars anyway. So Josh Alexander is familiar with the singles wrestling style. I think he's got all the tools, and again, he's locked in for a while. He's locked in until 2022. He's got a lot of credibility because of his work with the North. I think it would be silly for Impact Wrestling to not put Josh Alexander in the main event, and I think he does have the tools to potentially be a world champion in Impact Wrestling. So I think Josh Alexander is another name that potentially could be a world champion in 2021 when it comes to Impact Wrestling. But of course, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on the 5 future Impact World Champions that we have named here today on the channel? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about Impact Wrestling, WWE, AEW, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So get involved with the community. Drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube. Go up the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now. Or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video, along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. And I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.